No,
There we are. And welcome, it's 1 o'clock. And here we are for the Deal Doctor live stream Monday. And today we're going to talk about crossing T's, dotting I's. And I have a couple of our broker support folks, Deal Doctor Eric and Tracy, who are going to join us. And we're going to talk about all manner of stuff. I'm going to open it up talking about getting dates on your contracts. And I'll give an example. Several years ago, we had a situation where an agent didn't get a signature or didn't put a date on a buyer's agency contract when it began and when it ended. So as a result, when there was an issue about that buyer's agency, the right of that buyer agency to be enforced, it went before a court, and the court held that it wasn't enforceable because there was no start date and there was no end date. The agent failed to put a date in there. So I think it cost about $10,000, $12,000. That was about a $10,000 to $12,000 mistake on the part of the agent. We don't want agents to have to go through that. They basically render the contract unenforceable. We also had a situation where it was an ink signature signed in person. There was no date inserted because agents are getting a little more comfortable with it being put in automatically via dot loop. Well, so it was ink signed, it wasn't put in there, and then it became a point of contention, which was part of a complaint, a grievance complaint to a board, and we had to go and defend the agent. The only way we could verify when that contract, that purchase agreement was signed, is by going in and looking at the activity log and bringing that forward. It was a ton of work. It was months and months of waiting for this to get resolved. It is not something that we want to see agents have to go through because it mentally takes you out of the business. So encourage you to always put dates in contracts, even when it seems unnecessary. It's important.
And you know what I think about too, dates and contracts? I'm thinking about buyer's agency contracts when you do a new build. So you start the new build in January, and typically you might do a 6 month. It could, next thing you know, we're 14 months or a year into a new build and it's not done. Make sure you're going back and you're getting those extensions on those buyer's agency contracts, because really when you're getting paid is sort of tied to that build and the completion of that build.
Oh, absolutely. And if you're going to do a new build, I would start out with a buyer's agency contract, or at some point very early on, getting that buyer agency extended to a year or a year and a half, because nowadays it's going to take that long to get that construction completed.
Yep.
Eric, any thoughts about this before we move on? And
yeah, just with dates, what we continue to end up seeing is even people trying to put post dates on things don't do it, or trying to go back after the fact where you're trying to now solidify something. If your original documents don't have that, do an addendum to that purchase agreement, updating your dates and timeframes so that everyone can understand what's transpired. Just don't automatically go back, print it off, put it in ink, and then rescan it back in the dot loop and think that the problem's fixed. There's ways around everything, right? But we want to make sure you do it correctly with an addendum that everyone understands that, hey, the following purchase agreement date must be updated. The following date is blank, so that everyone understands there's no issues, there's no concerns, and there's a paper trail that can be followed appropriately.
Well, and we can't get away from the paper trail. I think that's a really important aspect of what you're talking about, Eric, because when you load that document, if you attempt to rewrite the history of a transaction by having something wet signed and then loading it into dot loop, guess what? That identifies that document as being loaded up, a day or two or a week or a month later, and boom, it's basically destroyed the agent's credibility in a lawsuit or a grievance complaint. Now the agent has nowhere to turn. So I agree with you. Be very, very careful about doing that, because with today's technology, it creates a forensic trail, and we can't get rid of it.
All right.
Everything right now is easily discoverable.
Mhm.
And it's for us, it's for you as an agent so that you can prove yourself. And sometimes when we don't do something right, that's okay. We just learn from it. But let's make sure we have the proper paperwork so that you can show someone, hey, this is what I did, and everyone can get on back on the same page.
Yep, the paper trail can hurt you or it can really help you. So you decide.
Exactly, exactly. Tracy, you had a thought earlier before we came on. We talked about a few things that we wanted to touch on today. And I'm gonna let you take the floor for a moment here and share what your thoughts are.
All right, what was my thought? We covered a lot of grounds. Which one were we talking about? Were we talking about organization in your dot loop? When we talked about,
Yes, that was one of them, and I think a really important one. But maybe before we go down that road, I do want to cover that. But we talked about clauses and no blanks in contracts and no blanks in contract. We know that's like the #1 reason for real estate related lawsuits.
right, yeah, it's when there's a blank there, there's a reason there's a blank there. It's because there's an intended moment to have an opportunity to put something into that contract. So if it doesn't apply, if you've checked a box and that paragraph applies to your purchase agreement, if the answer is nothing or 0, or it doesn't technically apply, simply put 0-NA. Putting something indicates I meant nothing to be here. If we leave it blank, we leave it open to I forgot. And that reminds me of my son who would say, I didn't know. No, you did know. You had an opportunity to fill it out. So do just that. Don't leave blanks in contracts anywhere. If there's a spot for a date, I realize even that dot loop timestamps it. But I still like to fill in the date. If it says date, I simply, add date from dot loop and then have the client, it indicates the time and date your client signed it. It may have been the day after the purchase agreement was written. So don't miss dates. They will be your friend. Don and Eric will sit and pour through documents in helping our agents go before a grievance board, answer to a complaint from the public. They're all really important to the health and well-being of your psyche at a later date, because you will lose sleep over these things.
Eric, you talked about clauses a little bit. You have anything to blanks?
Yeah,
again, there first.
The talk here is dotting your I's and crossing your T's.
Mhm.
And a lot of times when it comes to common clauses, or not even so much common clauses, just language that we're trying to use maybe for inspections, we always want to make sure that the idea that we're writing is clear and is unambiguous. It needs to come out very clear and direct. There also has to be a timeline associated with any requests that the buyer or seller needs to respond by a certain time and date. And then finally, what's the consequence when that timeline isn't met?
Mhm.
So again, we have the initial request, we have a date, and then we have a consequence. And just, if you ever have questions or concerns about how to write something, give us a call. We're there to try to help you. But and once you start doing this more and more, it gets easier. It does. Once you understand what it is how you need to write something, it does get easier.
Well, from my own experience, it's kind of having a building blocks. You have all of these building blocks of, here's what we're trying to accomplish. Here's the consequence. Here's the date. How do we put those together? We don't start from scratch. We have a basis from which we're working to help agents create a document that is both enforceable and clear. Tracy, your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, without them, it's the framework from which we work from. So if the purchase agreement gets signed, there are all kinds of timelines to work within, beginning with inspections, beginning with collecting the EMD, ordering title insurance, getting your inspections done, making sure you've got that conditional approval from the lender, if that's part of your purchase agreement. Think about all the ways you can protect your seller from just those standpoints. If you've waited until day 25 or 30 and you don't even know whether or not you have a conditional approval from the buyer, and we're wanting to know when the clear to close is coming, we've missed, a little bit of time here where we would have had a better understanding as to where the lender was at in the process.
Yeah, and let me add to that, Tracy, when we talk about timelines, if you really want to dot your I and cross your T's, I would encourage all agents to sit down with your purchase agreement and create a timeline or a planogram of what actions you need to perform as a buyer's agent or a listing agent. So many times, for example, okay, we know that we need to order title insurance, but do you realize that you also need to share that with the other side? That there's timelines. So the planogram is very important to ensure that you understand that you're meeting your deadlines within the purchase agreement. This is what's called, dotting the I's and crossing the T's. We're making sure that every single step of that process is done correctly. And if you're not sure where to start, the best place to do is pull out your purchase agreement and go through and start writing notes, just like we did in school. You start writing notes and you create your own planogram that works for you so that you can assure that you've done all the steps necessary. There's nothing worse than getting to closing and realize, oh, I never shared the title commitment to the other side.
Oh, and there was a problem in it and we're just discovering it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Now we have a
now the
lawsuit.
question is, do we move forward with a closing, which could be problematic later, as we know there's a situation going on right now. It is the agent's responsibility to review the title work from both sides, whether you are working as a seller's agent or as a buyer's agent. If you're working as a buyer's agent, it's important that you review the seller's policy as well as the mortgage policy, because that impacts your buyer. It's certainly important for the seller's agent to review the seller's document, but I would encourage them to review the buyer's policy as well, because there may be something on there that could impact their seller. I know, I'm well aware that not all agents read title work, but as Eric says, we have to deliver it within a certain period of time, and it is our job to know what the title work says. So I would encourage everybody to be very careful about that.
Yeah, because there's a timeline for response as well.
Correct.
So, yeah. So, and I would encourage too, and we can have this dropped into the Facebook Connect page, but Kim Anderson has worked on the buyer checklist and the seller checklist. And these are just simply a framework with which to work with. Now, you may find, like me, I have my own checklist that looks different than that. But for newer agents or agents who aren't using a checklist, this is a good checklist to get started with. And then over time, you have the opportunity to make it your own, but know what the steps are. And as Eric described, the planogram of the way your transaction should be laid out, much like when you go into a grocery store and you look at the way things are laid out. They're designed to be that way. And so is a closing.
Tracy, earlier you brought up the issue. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying, and with any of these documents as well, we also want to make sure that we did share those. I mean, anytime we get a fully executed set of documents, we always want to make sure that it's shared with the other side.
Yep.
Don't just assume because what they have a set and you have a set, that's a fully executed copy. Now, it can be, but the occupational code requires you as an agent, once you get a fully executed set of documents, that you need to share those with your client.
Right.
So please make sure that you're sharing fully executed documents, all documents, with your client. That will avoid you from, you need to do that because it's required. It's an occupational code requirement.
Right.
It's not acceptable. I know that we've all gone into places, whether it's a car dealer or someplace, and they've handed you a document that is unsigned and said, that's your copy, you can take it away. You sign another one and that's all okay. That's not okay in real estate. It is absolutely not okay, because that is it's a slam dunk. If you go before a grievance committee, that they will nail you for not providing the your client a fully executed purchase agreement, not just the information on a purchase agreement that everybody agrees to. So it's very important that you get those signatures.
And let me lead into that, Don, by further saying, when it comes to dot loop, I mean, when we're here to try to help you, and if anyone gets called in front of a grievance, there's nothing more frustrating than going into someone's loop and seeing multiple copies of the same thing, not knowing which one is most current. So we encourage agents, if you're no longer using a document, or if it's from an old transaction, archive it, or better yet, rename it not used.
Mhm.
That way, we know that when we're looking at something, it's not used.
Right, right.
Yeah,
So
that's a great
try
idea.
to, and I also further encourage, try to put them in order from the way that the documents were used. For example, a real estate agency disclosure should probably be at your very top, because that's
Mhm.
the first document that you typically end up using. Then your purchase agreement, seller's disclosure, lead-based paint, affiliated business arrangement disclosures. Sharing, if you're a buyer, the lead-based paint pamphlets. But if you can end up using those and put them in the order that you've used it, it really helps broker support and anyone else who needs to help you when we get into your loop to follow along what you did, where you started, where you're ending with. And if you aren't doing that, please do it. It helps.
The other thing I find helpful, and I don't know if you do as well, both of you, but I always create a loop and I put my name at the end of it. So it might be 123 Main Street, Phelan. And that way, everybody knows where my loop is. We may find ourselves with 2 or 3 loops open as documents are shared with another agent who's using dot loop and so on. And so all of a sudden you look in there and you've got 4 loops, 123 Main Street, and they all look the same, and they even have the same person's name on them. But if it says 1234 Phelan, I know that that's the loop I started. So that can be helpful too.
I changed mine to dead loop. If it's dead and it's, if I'm on the listing side and I've got several other people have shared their loop with me with the same address, I put dead loop 123 Main Street. So I know if anybody comes into this, whether it's me or somebody else, it's dead.
Yeah.
As I
Tracy,
said, the
you have
last thing
some
I'll
other-
say about dot loop, Don and Tracy, would be at the towards the bottom when we add people, there's a column to the right that indicates whether you're the buyer agent, seller agent, whether this is a buyer, who's the seller. I encourage agents to label those individuals so that when we do go in and we want to know who the key players are, that helps us understand who we're working with, so that when we have a conversation, I can address that person by the name and not just seller or buyer. Sometimes it gets confusing. It's so much easier when we have all the pieces in play and we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Again, this is what this topic's about, right?
Mhm,
It's not just throwing something into a loop and then forgetting about it.
right.
It takes time to make sure that these things are correct.
And I know that one of the things that we touch on quite often is when you're adding people to dot loop, to a new loop, do not add them as a team member.
Yes.
Do not add them as a team member. And the reason is that if you do, they will get to see everything in the loop. And if it's, if you're adding a listing broker in there, or a mortgage person, all of us, or a processor, title, all of them get to see it all of the documents, if you add them as a team member. So only add your team members, your real team members, like if you're working on a team or you're listing with a co-agent or whatever. Tracy, you had mentioned something about order, and we've touched on it a little bit, but was there more that you wanted to add to that?
I think that kind of covered it, because it was just about being organized inside of your dot loops, just for oversight purposes, and about learning to archive things and keeping, like I have my folders labeled in like buyer folder, pending folder, title folder. So only my buyer docs are in my buyer folder. Once I have a purchase agreement and it's signed, it goes into my pending docs. So I'm not going to have my buyer's agency agreement and my star title disclosure. in those, actually the star title disclosure would be in that doc, but you know, separate your documents so they make sense, that no matter who comes in that has oversight into your folder and needs to help, that you stay organized. And I like doing accepted offer packages. So dotting your I's and crossing your T's. Once your buyer has signed all of their agency disclosures, send that over with a nice little cover letter. You use the same one every time. You load it into Dotloop that says attached, please find, you know, all of your buyer agency documents, because it's time dated and stamped, that I share that with them. Same thing when I get an accepted offer package on the listing side, attached, please find your signed purchase agreement and the next steps. So here's everything you signed on the sell side, and here's the next steps. This is what to expect. Dot your I's, cross your T's.
Yeah,
I wanna
and I was
go
gonna
ahead.
say, Don, if people don't like sharing documents in Dotloop, and you do, and let's say you download a lot of things and you put them into an email, make sure you create a folder so that anytime you have emails, you can drop that and save it into your folder in Gmail or whatever email account that you're using, so that you have those records, because you're going to need to keep those for 3 years. There's a magic number here, 3 years for these documents, and we probably encourage even longer. But you want to make sure you're keeping your emails and your texts all in one place, because if you need to retrieve them for a reason, you'll be able to easily.
Sounds good. Any other quick thoughts before? I'd like to get a couple of questions if there are any questions out there. Any other thoughts, Eric?
Yeah, my last thought here is, when you're using your association documents, make sure you use the most up-to-date documents. The old documents are no longer valid. Associations don't like you using expired documents. They've updated those for a reason. So please use the most current up-to-date. If you can't find them, you can always reach out to your local association to get those, but also let us know. If we don't have something that's updated, we'll be happy to try to update that in Dotloop.
Excellent point. We had a situation come up last week where one of our agents received an offer on a very, very old, like 20-some-year-old purchase agreement. And my caution to the agent was, you don't know what that says because you weren't even licensed back then. I wouldn't even remember what that says 20 years ago. And so I would have to go through every single line of that to compare it to what the purchase agreement says today, because there have been so many changes over the last 20 some years. So if you, regardless of which side you're on, make sure you are working with up-to-date forms, and that if you don't have them or the other agent doesn't have them, I don't think it's unreasonable to say, we need to see your offer on a more current form. So I don't see any questions here. So unless we have, Eric, you had something?
No.
Okay. Tracy?
I'm good.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining, and we will see you here next week.
Sounds good. Goodbye.
Bye.